Roger Taney statue removed from the Maryland State House grounds overnight. The monument, dedicated to U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney, sits outside Maryland State House before it was removed in Annapolis, Maryland, early Friday, August 18, 2017. The statue of the U.S. Supreme Court Justice who wrote the 1857 Dred Scott decision that upheld slavery and denied citizenship to African Americans was lifted away by a crane at about 2 a.m. It was lowered into a truck and driven away to storage. By Pamela Wood and Aaron Cox, Baltimore Sun, Annapolis, Maryland. Under the cover of night, a work crew removed the statue of former Supreme Court Chief Justice Robert B. Taney, author of the infamous Dred Scott decision, from the grounds of the State House, ending the monument's 145-year prominent perch in Annapolis. At 12:20 a.m. Friday, flatbed trucks with equipment including a large crane pulled onto the street encircling the State House. Workers cordoned off the front lawn of the historic building and placed straps around the statue, the latest Confederate-era figure to be removed from a public square. Just before 2 a.m., the statue was slowly lifted from its base and clipped a few tree branches as it was guided onto a flatbed truck and wrapped. The statue has been moved to a secure Maryland State Archive storage facility. The removal comes after mounting pressure to take down the Taney statue culminated in Republican Governor Larry Hogan's reversal on the matter. His support, announced this week, provided enough votes for the 4-member State House Trust to approve on Wednesday to remove it. Hogan spokesman Doug Meyer said that the state decided to quietly and swiftly remove Taney's statue overnight as a matter of public safety. The granite pedestal that supported the hulking bronze statue of Taney since 1872 temporarily remains in place, surrounded by green plywood and guarded around the clock by 2 officers. The Taney statue is considered a formal part of Maryland's art collection, a status that means it will not be destroyed as long as the state owns it. Elaine Bachman, deputy state archivist, said there were no immediate plans to relocate or publicly display the Taney statue, which commemorates the other Marylanders to serve as Chief Justice. Taney's likeness on the front lawn of the Maryland State House has been controversial since it was installed because of Taney's authorship of the 1857 Dred Scott decision that defended slavery, holding that black Americans could not be citizens and had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. The decision, which historians say helped propel the nation toward civil war, has led Taney to be linked to leaders of the Confederacy. Efforts to remove his statue in Annapolis over the years have failed. As recently as Thursday, as plans were developing for the statue's midnight removal, Senate President Thomas Mike V. Miller wrote a letter to the governor defending the complex history of Taney and arguing why it should stay. The removal efforts became more urgent in the past week, and the Annapolis statue is the latest monument linked to the Confederate era to go. Baltimore Mayor Catherine Pugh ordered a middle-of-the-night removal of 4 monuments in the city this week, one of Taney, another of Confederate Generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, a Confederate Soldiers and Sailors monument, and a Confederate Women's monument. The Democratic mayor's decision came a year and a half after a city panel recommended that the monuments be moved or altered to add more historical context. The Baltimore monuments were stored under tarps in a city lot under police protection. The Taney statue in Annapolis was under close watch by Maryland Capitol Police officers all week. In advance of the late-night removal, a team of workers inspected the statue and took measurements at midday on Thursday. In the evening, no parking signs were posted around Narrow State Circle. While there is not a formal price tag yet for the job done by Whiting Turner, aides estimated the operation to cost roughly $100,000. About 2 dozen onlookers gathered around the street as word spread that the statue might come down. About 1:20 a.m., sprinklers turned on, dousing onlookers and workers until the water was shut off, about 15 minutes later. Gwen Norman of Baltimore happened upon the crowd watching the removal of the statue after a night out in Annapolis with friends. She was pleased that Baltimore had removed its Taney statue and 3 Confederate monuments and felt fortunate to witness the Taney removal in Annapolis. "It was a beautiful thing to wake up and see something so beautiful happen when I was asleep," said Norman, 27. "It was nice to see Annapolis get prettier tonight," said her companion, 30-year-old Ian Wolfe of Frederick. The removals were spurred by last week's rally by neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan, and other white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia, ostensibly to protest plans to remove a statue of Lee there. The rally turned deadly. A counter-protester was killed when a neo-Nazi sympathizer allegedly drove his car into a crowd, and 2 police officers monitoring the scene died when their helicopter crashed. When the Maryland State House Trust members were polled by email on Wednesday, 3 members voted for removal: Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford, who represented Hogan on the trust, House Speaker Michael E. Bush, and Charles L. Edson, who represents the Maryland Historical Trust. The trust's 4th member, Miller, did not vote. Bush, an Anne Arundel County Democrat, called for the statue's removal Monday. "It certainly doesn't belong there," the speaker said. "It's the appropriate time to remove it." He said leaving it in place after white supremacists openly rallied would send a message that we condone what took place, that slavery is all right. Miller's letter to Hogan Thursday evening said the vote lacked transparency because it was held by email rather than in public. "This was certainly a matter of such consequence that the transparency of a public meeting and public conversation should have occurred," Miller wrote. "This was not an ordinary matter of business before the trust. The State House Trust rarely meets in person, often casting votes by email for matters such as approving new plantings on the grounds or giving the go-ahead for performances in the building." Miller, a Calvert County Democrat, acknowledged the inflammatory and derogatory language in the fallout of the Dred Scott decision, but he noted that Taney also served with distinction in series of public offices, including as a state lawmaker, state attorney general, and U.S. attorney general. Miller also noted that Taney freed his slaves and remained loyal to the Union. Miller said Taney's complex history is often lost amid discussion. Mayor Hogan's spokesman said Miller is completely within his right to continue defending Roger Taney. "We have to agree to disagree." Hogan previously supported keeping the Taney statue in place. He reversed course this week, saying removing the monument was the right thing to do. "While we cannot hide from our history, nor should we, the time has come to make clear the difference between properly acknowledging our past and glorifying the darkest chapters of our history," Hogan said Tuesday in a statement. Miller said the installation of a statue of late Justice Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American appointed to the High Court, on the opposite side of the State House, was a very public and purposeful compromise to give balance to the State House grounds, recognizing our state and our country have a flawed history. President Donald J. Trump, who was criticized this week for saying blame for the Charlottesville violence was shared by both sides instead of condemning the white supremacist groups, weighed in on the removal of the Confederate monuments in a series of tweets Thursday morning. "Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments," the Republican president said on Twitter, a day after Baltimore removed its monuments. "You can't change history, but you can learn from it. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, who's next? Washington, Jefferson? So foolish. Now that the 4 Confederate-linked monuments have been taken down, the city of Baltimore must decide what to do with them."